She was the perfect woman, the wife everyone envied. But no one knew the dark secrets she was hiding. One night, a simple mistake by a cleaning lady at a gala party would bring everything down. What no one expected was that this cleaning lady, with courage and a silent truth, would expose a betrayal that would change everyone's destiny. Stay with me, because what happened next will leave you speechless. Before we begin this story of twists and turns and emotions, subscribe to the channel, leave your like, and tell us in the comments which city you are listening to our story from. Now get ready, because the story is about to begin. The main hall of Ricardo's mansion was a masterpiece of sophistication. The marble floor looked freshly polished, reflecting the shine of the imposing chandeliers hanging from the very high ceiling. Soft, enveloping piano music filled every corner, setting the tone for the reception that was both elegant and superficial. It was a gala evening meticulously prepared by Clarissa, Ricardo's wife, who loved luxury and dedicated herself to making each event a spectacle to impress the local high society. Dressed in an exclusive model, with crystals that sparkled under the lights, Clarissa moved among the guests with a smile that seemed carved in marble. Beautiful in appearance, but completely cold in essence. "You look stunning, Clarissa," complimented a lady with impeccably groomed hair, probably another wife of some influential partner, flattering Clarissa in the hope of receiving favors or keeping in her good graces. Clarissa bowed her head slightly, maintaining her calculated smile. Inside, she despised most of the people around her, seeing them as mere extras in her grand social theater. Meanwhile, behind the curtains of this spectacle of appearances, the house's new cleaning lady, Teresa, ran from one side to the other, determined not to make any mistakes at her first big party working for this powerful couple. Dressed in a simple uniform and with her hair tied up, she tried hard to make herself practically invisible, even though she was essential to keeping everything impeccable. "Be careful with the trays, please," one of the waiters warned Teresa, passing by her in a whisper. Teresa nodded briefly, feeling nervousness tingle in her hands. She knew that this was an event of extreme importance for Clarissa and Ricardo, and she could not afford any slip-ups. Clarissa, on the other side of the room, showed off her expensive dress with confidence. In her mind, she was on top of the world, untouchable and unshakable in her sovereignty. It never crossed her mind that anything or anyone could ruin the night of glory she had planned so much. However, ironically, life's greatest setbacks usually arise from the smallest oversights. Teresa, as she passed a table full of guests, was holding a silver tray with wine glasses with extreme care. The floor, perfectly clean, had a slight unevenness that she did not notice. In a second of distraction, Teresa's foot tripped and caused one of the glasses to fall off the tray, spilling the red wine directly onto Clarissa's luxurious dress. Time seemed to freeze. The guests' murmurs and laughter turned into an awkward, almost cruel silence. Clarissa looked at her own body, in disbelief at the red stain that was quickly spreading across the fabric. Anger took over her face. "You incompetent!" Clarissa exploded, her voice echoing off the marble walls. "I'm sorry. Teresa tried to stammer, her eyes brimming with panic. But Clarissa was not willing to forgive so soon. "Do you have any idea how much this dress costs?" "More than you'll ever earn in your entire life," he shouted, humiliating Teresa in front of everyone without any consideration for the terrified girl. Some guests looked away, embarrassed. Others, probably driven by the desire to stay in Clarissa's good graces, let out nervous giggles. Teresa felt every cell in her body trembling, the shame weighing on her shoulders like an unbearable burden. However, instead of apologizing again, she unexpectedly raised her face and looked at Clarissa with a serenity that no one there could have predicted. "You forget that I know your true story, Donna Clarissa." Teresa's voice was firm, even if low, and hit Ricardo's wife like a blow straight to the stomach. A chill ran through the room. The buzz of conversation was replaced by an even more intense silence, and everyone present felt the tension in the air. Clarissa, stunned, tried to compose herself, but she couldn't stop the color in her face from turning pale. Ricardo, who had been talking to one of the company's partners on the other side of the room, noticed the scene and came over in a hurry. "What's going on?" he asked, looking between his wife and Teresa. Clarissa pointed at the cleaning lady, still indignant. "That clumsy girl ruined my dress, Ricardo. Just look at the damage she did." Ricardo noticed the wine dripping down the expensive fabric, but he also saw Teresa's frightened and, at the same time, determined expression. Something about that scene didn't seem like just an accident. There was something deeper there, a key piece that he didn't yet understand. "Teresa, what exactly did you say? Can you repeat that, please?" Ricardo asked, in a tone of someone who wanted clarification. Teresa took a deep breath, feeling everyone's eyes fixed on her. Even so, she answered with the same firmness. "I said I know Mrs. Clarissa's secrets. Secrets she wouldn't want anyone to discover." The eyes at the party, previously focused on Clarissa, now turned to Ricardo and Teresa. No one dared to interrupt, but curiosity was evident. Clarissa, still trying to regain her authoritative pose, let out a nervous laugh. "How absurd. You must be delirious. A cleaning lady thinking she can make up stories to get attention." But the laughter didn't convince anyone. The tension was almost suffocating. Ricardo, frowning, turned to Teresa again. "Teresa, if you know something, tell me." She remained silent for a moment, as if considering how far she could go. Then she lifted her chin and, in a calm voice, began to speak. "My father worked for many years as an accountant in your company, Mr. Ricardo. He was dedicated, honest, and always loyal. But he discovered documents that proved that part of the money was being directed to illegal accounts. And the person who signed this paperwork was Clarissa." Teresa's confession came as a bombshell. Some guests covered their mouths in disbelief. Others looked at Clarissa, expecting her to deny everything convincingly. However, Clarissa could not hide the tremor that ran through her body. Her face hardened. "That's an insult. Are you accusing me of stealing? Do you think I would do anything to harm Ricardo?" she shouted, every syllable thick with rage. "I'm just telling the truth," Teresa replied. "If you doubt me, I can show you the evidence. My father saved it before he passed away." The whispers in the hall turned into audible comments. People exchanged shocked looks, not knowing who to believe. Ricardo felt his heart racing. As much as he trusted his wife, something in Teresa's posture and in the almost pleading eyes of many present indicated that the situation was not a simple invention. Then, he spoke in a firm and low voice. "Clarissa, this is serious. I want to see this evidence tomorrow, Teresa. And if it is true, there will be consequences." Clarissa's eyes widened. Her all-powerful image was in check before the society that flattered her so much. Her own husband, previously so controlled by her seductive and haughty presence, now gave her a look full of distrust. The gala that was supposed to be her coronation as the perfect hostess had become an arena where she had to fight for her own reputation. The atmosphere in Richard's mansion changed drastically after that public confrontation. As soon as the guests left, the silence that remained carried with it a heavy, almost palpable feeling. Clarissa hurriedly climbed the stairs while Richard remained thoughtful in the main hall, observing the empty glasses and the remains of food scattered across the tables. He felt betrayed and at the same time confused. The next day, before dawn, Teresa was already up and about to start her daily tasks. But that day, the feeling that something huge was about to happen accompanied her. It was like an omen. And it wasn't long before Ricardo called her to his office. "I want to see what you have," he said, straight to the point. Teresa did not hesitate. She took out a slightly crumpled envelope from a simple bag containing papers and statements that her father had gathered when they noticed suspicious financial movements. She handed everything to Ricardo. It took him a few seconds to sit down, open the envelope and start reading. As his eyes scanned the pages, Ricardo's expression became increasingly somber, indicating that the evidence was, in fact, substantial. Numbers, dates, unknown bank accounts, signatures. Everything indicated that Clarissa was involved in embezzlement. "Where did you get this?" he asked, still not looking up from the documents. "They were given to me by my father, sir. He worked here for many years and did not have the opportunity to show you this evidence. Soon after he discovered what was happening, he fell ill. Before he passed away, he gave me this envelope, asking me to keep it for when it was necessary to reveal the truth." Ricardo finished reading, closed the envelope, and looked at Teresa with a mixture of frustration, shame, and indignation. He would need to confront Clarissa. He would need to confront his own feelings. He took a deep breath, leaning back in his chair. "Teresa, it's not your fault. I appreciate you bringing this to my attention. But now, please go back to your duties. I need to be alone to think." Teresa nodded silently, relieved and apprehensive at the same time. She had been carrying a huge weight on her shoulders since she learned the whole truth. But revealing everything was part of her responsibility, even if it meant displeasing the millionaire's wife or shaking up the life of the person who employed her. As the cleaning lady left the office, Ricardo stood motionless, staring at the envelope on the desk, thinking about the years he had lived with Clarissa. He thought about all the signs he might have noticed, the times when his wife had seemed mysteriously opulent, even when the company was not making much profit. He wondered how he could have been so blind. Clarissa, confined to her rooms, paced back and forth. Desperation was evident in every gesture. The night before, after the party, she had tried to convince Ricardo that Teresa was lying to promote herself, but her husband's neutral expression showed that he would no longer accept her excuses so easily. She needed to act. Her calculating mind was searching for a way to get out of this mess without losing her throne. She thought of arguments, plots, ways to forge evidence that could incriminate the cleaning lady. Perhaps if she diverted her focus from her own mistakes, there would still be salvation for her marriage and, most importantly, for her luxurious lifestyle. However, deep down, Clarissa knew that the chances were slim. What Teresa had said in front of everyone, and the evidence she would probably show Ricardo, seemed irrefutable. Despite this, she would not give up so easily. She was fully aware that desperate people are capable of anything. When Ricardo finally met Clarissa late that morning, there was a chasm between them. The man, firm, looked at his wife with a look that mixed sadness and indignation. "I saw the documents," he said, trying to control the tremor in his voice. "We need to talk." Clarissa, sitting at her dressing table, was touching up her makeup as if she wanted to feel more confident. But when she heard Ricardo's words, she stopped what she was doing. She turned around slowly. "And you believed that lowly employee instead of me?" she retorted bitterly. "It's not about who I believe. It's about what's in front of me, Clarissa. Bank statements, signatures, everything proving that you embezzled money. You stole from me." A deathly silence fell over the room. Clarissa bit her lower lip, almost feeling a slight tremor. She had never seen her husband so indignant. She tried to argue. "I didn't mean any harm, Ricardo. It was all to protect us. You know your company has been through some hardships and I took the liberty of doing what I thought was necessary. Trust me, I never intended to harm you." Ricardo let out a bitter laugh. "Protect? You created secret accounts to send money out of the country. If that's not betraying my trust, then I don't know what is. I'm sorry, but your explanations don't make sense." Clarissa stood up, approaching Ricardo to try to hug him. He, however, stepped back, keeping his distance. "Please, Ricardo, we are married. We built all this together. You can't just abandon me because of a misunderstanding." "Misunderstanding?" he replied, his eyes flashing with contained anger. "Clarissa, there is ample documentation that indicates your direct involvement in the embezzlement of funds from my company. How do you think I should react Pretend nothing happened? Clarissa felt the ground disappearing from her. Her greatest fear was beginning to come true. The possibility of losing Ricardo, the mansion, the life of ostentation. She needed a quick solution. With each passing moment, the revelation seemed more inevitable, and she couldn't bear the idea of everything she had achieved crumbling. You can't completely trust these documents, Ricardo. You don't know if they were forged. Who can guarantee that Teresa didn't set all this up? He ventured, placing the blame on the cleaning lady. Ricardo shook his head in disbelief. And why would she do that? What reason would she have to stage such a farce? Clarissa was left speechless. There was no argument strong enough to justify the idea that Teresa had set up such a complex plot. Despair was growing inside her, but she would not allow her husband to see her weakness. "Are you going to listen to me or not?" she said, lifting her chin. "You know that I have always taken care of our social image. Maybe I made some arrangements with money so that we would not be drowned in debt. Yes, I opened accounts to safeguard our situation, but everything was thought of us. It is Teresa's fault that she exposed this, distorting the whole story." Ricardo's anger was evident, but he held back his harshest words. There was no point in shouting or insulting anyone. He took a deep breath, making up his mind. "I'll contact my lawyers. We'll talk again when I'm sure of every detail. For now, Clarissa, I don't want to hear any more of your excuses." Before she could respond, Ricardo left the room, slamming the door firmly. Clarissa stood there, shocked, staring into space. She had always thought she could manipulate any situation, but now she saw her tricks coming to a dead end. The following hours were marked by a tense atmosphere. Some of the house's employees, who had witnessed fragments of the confrontation, whispered in the corridors, fearing that they would become Clarissa's target, or that they would be caught in Ricardo's wrath. Teresa, in turn, tried to maintain her work routine, but it was impossible to ignore the curious looks that fell on her. Many wondered if the story the cleaning lady was telling was really true. Others were surprised by her courage to confront Clarissa in public, and there were those who completely distrusted her. In the early hours of the morning, Teresa retired to her small room at the back of the mansion. Sitting on the bed, she stared at the empty envelope that once held her father's documents. She felt the weight of having unleashed a turmoil in everyone's lives there. At the same time, a part of her believed she had done the right thing by exposing Clarissa's fraud. She wondered, however, if she would have the strength to face the consequences that would come. Ricardo spent the night awake. He had a pile of papers on his desk, evaluating documents that, until then, he had never had reason to suspect. He sent a message to a trusted auditor, Eugenio, to help him with the analysis. If there was anything he had learned from that situation, it was that he needed someone neutral, with no emotional ties to Clarissa or the house. The next morning, Eugenio arrived, and together they immersed themselves in checking Ricardo's company accounts. They discovered forged signatures, hidden transactions, everything meticulously prepared. Whoever was responsible, they had left no loose ends that were easy to find. Clarissa's name appeared more than it should have in several reports. Old spreadsheets showed meaningless expenses, transfers to foreign accounts, all within a pattern that indicated planning. Ricardo felt each revelation like a stab in the chest. It was hard to face the reality that he had been deceived by the woman he had trusted blindly. Eugenio, leaning over a pile of paperwork, cleared his throat before speaking. "This is very solid evidence, Ricardo. If it really is Clarissa's signature, she will have a lot to explain to the courts." Ricardo nodded, unable to hide his look of disappointment. "Eugene, I appreciate your honesty. Continue the investigation. I need everything checked and any other person involved identified." As the auditor continued, each discovery reinforced the obvious conclusion. Clarissa had not acted on impulse, but systematically. It was difficult to measure exactly how much had been embezzled, but the losses were not insignificant. Clarissa, aware that Ricardo had conducted an internal audit, realized that her days of disguise were numbered. However, instead of retreating, she decided to go on the attack. She searched through old files, taking advantage of the limited access she still had to the rooms in the house, looking for something she could use against Teresa. A document, a sheet of paper with numbers, anything that would insinuate the cleaning lady's involvement in the schemes, to place the blame on her. She spent hours examining drawers and rummaging through folders until she found some accounting records that referred to the period when Teresa's father still worked at the company. Clarissa quickly crossed out, amended, and added data to forge a theory that incriminated Teresa as if she were an accomplice or even the mastermind, manipulating her own father. If Ricardo is naive, he might believe that this woman had always planned this scam, Clarissa murmured, mentally planning her defense. Anything was better than admitting that she had been unmasked. However, Clarissa knew she needed to be convincing. She kept the forged documents in a file, waiting for the right moment to present them. Her plan was simple and despicable: to claim that, after Teresa's accusations, she decided to investigate on her own and discovered irrefutable evidence that the cleaning lady was behind the crimes, setting up Ricardo's wife. Late in the afternoon, when Ricardo returned from a meeting with Eugenio, Clarissa saw her opportunity. She approached her husband in one of the hallways with an apprehensive and, at the same time, determined expression. "Ricardo, we need to talk. It's important." He watched her for a few seconds. He knew Clarissa wouldn't give up easily, but he wanted to hear what she had to say. "About what?" he asked cautiously. She raised the folder she was carrying in her hands, pretending to be sorry. "I know you don't trust me anymore, but I've found out some things you need to see. It's about Teresa. She may not be as innocent as she seems." Ricardo immediately frowned. He knew Clarissa was probably up to something. Still, he picked up the papers and began to leaf through them. At first glance, the numbers seemed consistent, and Teresa's or her father's supposed signatures appeared at crucial points. Anyone who didn't understand accounting could easily fall for that trick. "That doesn't make sense," was the first sentence that escaped Ricardo's lips. "And Teresa wouldn't gain anything from this. She herself brought the evidence against you." Clarissa made a victim expression. "I've thought about that, but what if she wanted to destroy our family out of revenge? Maybe she planned it from the beginning. After all, as you say, there's no reason for her to risk telling everything, unless it was a dirty strategy to get involved." Ricardo closed the folder without revealing what he was thinking. "I will review these documents with my auditor. We will talk later." He walked away, leaving Clarissa speechless. However, she believed that if those papers planted the seed of doubt, she could regain control. What she didn't know was that Ricardo already had the help of an experienced professional capable of detecting manipulation. When Ricardo exposed the contents to Eugenio, Clarissa's frauds became obvious. False signatures, dates that didn't match, and all the formatting indicated that someone had tampered with the records in a hurry. "This is a forgery," the auditor declared, "an obvious attempt to incriminate Teresa, but any honest expert would unmask it in a matter of minutes." Ricardo clenched his jaw, feeling anger bubble up. Clarissa, in addition to having betrayed him in financial matters, was now trying to set him up against the only person who had the courage to reveal the truth. "She's desperate," Ricardo concluded, staring at the papers. "But it won't work." He knew that the time had come to put an end to this situation once and for all. He would have to expose Clarissa in front of everyone who had once applauded her parties and flattered her great lady attitude. And as painful as it was, the time had also come to deal with the divorce proceedings. The next morning, Ricardo decided to gather some of the company's partners and his auditor at the mansion to finally show them the conclusions of the investigation. He also invited Teresa, who did not quite understand why she had been called to participate in a kind of formal meeting at the house, but attended, fearful of what might happen. "Clarissa, As she came down the stairs and came across the small group, knew immediately that something serious was about to happen. Her heart skipped a beat, but she tried to maintain her haughty posture. "What does this mean?" she asked, looking at Ricardo and the partners who were leafing through documents. Ricardo took the floor, standing in the center of the main room. "It means we are going to clarify all recent events. Enough lies, Clarissa." The partners looked at each other anxiously. Some had been close to Ricardo for years. Others had only known Clarissa through dinners and parties. No one would ever imagine that this seemingly sophisticated woman could be involved in something illicit. Eugenio began to present the conclusions. After a long analysis, we discovered several misappropriations of company funds, offshore accounts, false documents, forged signatures. Everything points to Clarissa's name. Murmurs of astonishment filled the room. Clarissa, desperate to preserve her own image, raised her voice. "That's absurd. I would never do something like that. That auditor must be being paid to lie about me." Ricardo looked at her with eyes filled with a coldness that made her tremble. "You tried to frame Teresa yesterday, didn't you? You gave me forged papers claiming she was part of a scam. We've already confirmed the forgery. You've crossed the line, Clarissa." The partners, upon hearing about the false accusation, looked at each other in even greater shock. Some stood up, staring at Clarissa, expecting her to deny it. But the woman had no way out. She trembled slightly, wanting to shout her innocence, but there was nothing plausible to say. Teresa, in a corner of the room, remained silent, but her heart seemed to be beating strongly. Seeing Clarissa being exposed was shocking, but at the same time she felt relieved. The truth was finally emerging without beating around the bush. Ricardo then turned to his partners and made the toughest announcement of his life. "I will initiate divorce proceedings and take all legal measures to ensure that the embezzled money is returned, or, when that is not possible, that it is donated to charity. I will not allow the image of the company and my name to be tarnished, and I will not let anyone who has acted against me go unpunished, even if that person is my wife." Clarissa felt her legs weaken as she heard those final words. It was like a sentence announcing the end of everything. Many of those present looked at her with disapproval. She, who had previously humiliated those she considered inferior, was now being judged by everyone's gaze. The silence that followed was suffocating, almost cruel. One by one, the partners left, stunned and speaking in low voices. Eugenio collected the papers, saying goodbye discreetly. Teresa remained in the room, paralyzed, while Clarissa and Ricardo stared at each other. Ricardo took a few steps towards his wife. "We could have avoided all this misfortune, but you chose to follow a path of no return." Clarissa did not answer. The tears, which she had previously refused to let fall, now ran down her face, mixing with her mascara. With her face stained, she understood that she would lose everything: the mansion, the life of luxury, and, even worse, Ricardo's admiration and affection, if there was still a crumb of that somewhere in his heart. He walked away, leaving her alone in the center of the room, sunk in her own ruin. The heavy air seemed to announce that this was the end of an era. When night fell, Clarissa was still wandering around the house. She went down to the living room, running her fingers over the polished furniture as if to memorize every detail. Tomorrow, lawyers would arrive to deal with the divorce papers. Soon, she would need to pack up her belongings and abandon the entire empire that, for years, had seemed to be an extension of her own identity. A few employees passed by without saying a word. One or two looked at her with pity. To most, Clarissa had been a demanding, authoritarian employer, incapable of showing empathy. And now, ironically, she was the one who seemed to need pity. Upstairs, Ricardo remained silent in his office. The whirlwind of feelings prevented him from sleeping. The house was strangely empty, even with so many people. He thought about everything he had experienced with Clarissa, trying to remember exactly when things had started to go wrong. His biggest mistake, perhaps, was ignoring obvious signs. But the past cannot be fixed. The only thing left to do is to act in the present and try to build a different future. Teresa, in her simple room, could hear the distant echo of Clarissa's footsteps in the hallways. She imagined how much everything was hurting for that woman who had once been so powerful and cruel to those she considered inferior. At the same time, Teresa remembered her father, his honesty, and how proud he would be to see that she had the courage to carry on the fight that he could not complete in life. The next day, the sun rose, bringing a bittersweet sense of renewal. The lawyers arrived early, carrying documents. Clarissa, with a tired and haggard expression, wore modest clothes, without her usual ostentation. There was no one else to show off her designer dresses. The formalities were brief, and when the signatures were made, she felt as if a giant door had closed, locking her out forever. Shortly after, with a simple suitcase in hand, Clarissa left the mansion without looking back. No one said goodbye, and she didn't dare demand anything. She left carrying the certainty that her reign, built on foundations of deceit, had crumbled once and for all. Ricardo watched the door close behind her. There was a moment of strangeness, but also of relief. It was time to move on. He turned around, finding Teresa standing near the stairs, still with an apprehensive expression, unsure whether or not to congratulate her boss for having made the right decision. "Is everything okay, Mr. Ricardo?" she asked quietly, as if she was afraid of disturbing his moment of catharsis. "Yes, Teresa. I think for the first time in months, I can say that everything is okay. Or at least, it will be." "Otoy," he replied with a slight smile, which mixed relief and sadness. "Thank you for bringing the truth to light. I owe you a lot." "I only did what was right, sir," she answered honestly, remembering her father and the advice he always repeated. "The truth may hurt, but it is necessary." Ricardo let his gaze wander through the corridors, noticing how the mansion, once a stage for parties and false brilliance, now finally seemed to be breathing. The walls no longer held the screams of those who lived on appearances. There was room to start over. "You helped me see what was right in front of my eyes, and I refused to see. I would like you to stay here, Teresa. I trust you, and I know that together we can bring order to this house." Teresa blinked in surprise, feeling her heart beat faster. She had never thought she would receive such trust from a man who, until recently, she had considered unattainable. "Whatever you need, I'll be here to help," he replied modestly, but also with determination. Ricardo let out a sigh of tiredness that seemed to have been held in for years. Not long ago, he would never have imagined seeing his life turned upside down, much less sharing projects with a simple cleaning lady. But life sometimes knocks down our certainties to teach us to find new paths. "Then let's rebuild," he concluded, with a discreet gleam in his eyes. "You without lies, without dissimulation, without arrogance. I want this house to be a real home, not just another stage for plays." Teresa nodded, feeling a gentle warmth invade her chest. They both knew it wouldn't be easy. There would be a process to undo the fraud, recover finances, and deal with the curious eyes of society. Still, honesty would bring peace of mind, something that no amount of money could buy. And so, on that clear day, Ricardo's mansion went from being a monument to vanity and appearances to a symbol of a new beginning. Although the walls and chandeliers remained as luxurious as ever, now the seed of something much more valuable was planted there: mutual respect, gratitude, and truth. For Ricardo, for Teresa, and for all who remained, this represented the beginning of a new chapter, rewritten with dignity and without room for shadows or betrayal.